Again, I do work for this Alumni Council on Admissions, and I always like to start by saying I am not an admissions officer for Penn. I used to work in an admissions office, not at Penn, so I do have that perspective of having worked on the other side of the fence. My current position is in the alumni office at Penn, but they allow us to watch what they do in admissions. So hopefully, having watched for now 7.5 years, I hope that I've gained some insight as to what happens during the selection process. And I like to just open the door and make that as transparent as I possibly can to the alumni and their children or grandchildren that are considering Penn, with the goal that if you know, I'd like to say this, if you know how the test is going to be graded, you may prepare a little bit better for that test. So that's my goal in what I do in my job. So that's my goal tonight. We will have plenty of time, we hope. We've allowed plenty of time for questions. But what we'd like to do is, Emily has a pitch that she'd like to give. I think you're going to focus on extracurricular activities and say how they might play out in the college selection process. I'm going to talk about academics and how they play out in the selection process. So we'll give a pretty good overview of a couple different important aspects of the application. Then we were thinking of going back and forth with a couple different just quips to wrap up, and then we do want to turn to questions. But I'll just ask you to hold off until we get to that point, and then we'll take questions. And I want to just look ahead to that point. Folks, don't be afraid to ask any question. No softballs tonight, okay? I always like to, and I've used the example of the Phil Donahue talk show host. And a lot of the young people in the room, it goes right over their head, they don't know who Phil Donahue is. So I have to go back to Oprah Winfrey, because I'm exactly like Oprah Winfrey. No, if you throw us a softball, I want to twist it into a curveball. I want to get the real issues out on the table, because I know that selective admissions is sometimes a very frustrating thing to watch. You may have friends. Let me just ask, first I'll get a lay of the land here. How many students or how many families in the room are here representing a high school junior, someone who's a junior this year? So a pretty good number. Okay. How many are representing a high school sophomore? If you have both, keep raising your hand. Sophomores? Okay. How about freshmen? Who has a freshman? Yeah. Are any actual freshman students here in the room? Maybe you're a freshman, a couple of freshmen in high school? So people have it on their minds before I did when I was in high school. How about 8th graders? Anyone represent an 8th grader? Don't laugh. I get calls from parents of kindergartners asking where should I go to grade school. Yeah, kindergarten right there. Okay. 6th grade. Just wanted to get a feel for that. People have college on their minds a little bit earlier than at least I did. I didn't start looking at colleges until very, very late in my junior year of high school. And I don't think I visited any until the senior year fall semester. And I hear from a lot of parents, they didn't visit colleges until they heard where they got in. And I'm seeing a lot of nod yeses, that's kind of how things were done. And now, things seem to be ratcheted up. People are a little bit scared of this process. And it is because either you have a son or daughter that just went through this in the last couple of years. How many people have a freshman in college? How many people have a senior that's just surviving this thing? A few. Okay, just a couple. They're just surviving this process, thank God. But you've either been through it and you've seen where a college makes a decision that baffles your mind. Why are they turning away this brilliant student who's at the top of their group, that has wonderful testing, that is a leader in activities, and would seemingly be a terrific candidate anywhere? It baffles you when they get turned away some places. And I've looked at the admissions process in my work. When I get to observe, I observe through that lens. I want to find out, why are admissions committees behaving in the way they do? So I'm going to tackle the academic side of things. First, just to point out, we are trying to talk about the more selective institutions. There are plenty of institutions out there that are not as selective. And I think sometimes the image that the media would portray is that every college is kind of out to get you and they're all really picky. Does anyone know the national average acceptance rate for four-year colleges in the country? Anyone? No one want to guess? What percentage of students get in on the average? Do I hear a guess? 65? Anyone want to go higher or lower? We're going to do prices right. 95? You want to say 95% is the national average? Who wants to go lower than 65? Anyone? Good. Actually, Everyone goes with about 65 then. Is that where that's what the room is saying? 68 is the answer. Penn took about 17% of its applicant pool each of the last couple of years. We all know schools that are a little bit more selective than Penn. Anyone want to shout one out? Harvard, yeah, the other Ivies, right? Yeah, MIT, which one did you say?
I said 12%.
12%. Which school was that? Columbia, okay, yeah, and I think they've been below 10. We hear those numbers, and sometimes we get swept up and we think that every college is out to get us. Remember, a lot of colleges are going to be banging down your door to get your business. And that's something I really want to impress upon the students. When we get into talking about the college search, I'm really going to impress that upon the students. But the national average is 68%. When a school reaches about the 50% or lower acceptance range, then they become highly selective. And there are only about 300 colleges in the country that admit at or below 50%. So we're only talking about 10% of the colleges here. But that's what we're trying to focus on. Our goal is if we can tell you how they think when they're in their admissions committee, then hopefully you're prepared for the rest of them too. That's sort of our thinking here. So I'm going to dive into what they're looking at when they're looking at an academic record. And I'm going to approach this as if I'm talking to a whole room full of juniors at first, high school juniors, and try to give you advice that's applicable. And then I hope we can extract some advice that might come out for the students who are younger. Because obviously, if I meet a person who's in 7th or 8th grade, I can give them a lot more advice than I can to a high school junior. And I fully acknowledge that. But let's first talk about what kind of factors admissions committees are looking at in the academic sense. I can tell you from observing Penn, they put a lot of importance on the rigor, the level of challenge that you've taken at your school as compared to what's available at your school. They're very much looking at you in the context of your school, and they're looking for the student that has really challenged themselves and taken the most rigorous coursework available at that school. And I keep saying at that school in the context of that school because that answer is going to change a little bit depending on where you go to school. And they're going to get to know that. They're going to get to know your school. They're going to look at what you did take, but they're going to know what you could have taken. They're going to know what other students have taken at your school. And you want the list of what you did take to be really big, and you want the list of what you did not take in terms of challenging curriculum. You want that to be a really short list. And the closer you are to zero there, the better off you're going to be. So they're spending a lot of time getting to know your school. They're not simply looking at your grade point average. They're not just looking at a rank. And most of the students I meet are coming from schools that don't provide a class rank. How many people attend or have a child who attends a school, a high school, that still provides class rank? Raise your hand. Yeah, very few, very few. And if they do provide it, it's a little bit of context about your school. But for the rest of us in the room that attend a school that don't provide class rank, don't worry about that. It just makes the college have to work a little bit harder to get to know the context of your school. So they really are getting to know that school, and they want you to challenge yourself. So the advice I give to people is pursue the highest level available in each of the major academic subjects. And when I say major academic subjects, I'm talking about what I call the 5 majors are math, science, English, history, and foreign language. And I acknowledge that I over-summarize it, because I've met people who've gone to schools, and they throw another topic out there and say, isn't that academic? And I say, absolutely. So there are some other academic things. But generally, almost every high school that I've encountered offers math, science, English, history, and foreign language. And I tell students, take those for each year that you're in high school, but look ahead in your schedule. Now I'm doing something that a high school junior can probably not do. I'd like to talk to the 8th and 9th graders or younger and tell them, look at what this year's high school seniors are taking at your school. What are the most challenging courses available in each of those areas? And find out, am I on track now in 7th grade, 8th grade, to take the highest level course in each of those subjects? And if I am not on track to take those classes, can I get on track? I sometimes like to say that I'm like the lighthouse. And the juniors, you're brushing right up against the coast here. It's hard to steer a ship when you're a junior. You're that close to the coast. As a 7th or 8th grader, you have time to steer your ship. So I like to kind of get on the parents' good side here and say to the students who are in 7th or 8th grade, listen to your parents when they try to give you some advice about steering the ship towards those more rigorous courses, because they really will make a difference when a college goes to evaluate you. If you are a high school junior, Now, could you look ahead to next year's classes and maybe make a correction? That's a possibility. You're still choosing courses. And the college is still going to see what you're taking next year. Even if you apply early decision or rolling admissions early in your senior year, they're still going to see on your transcript what classes you're taking senior year, and that will matter. And in many cases, even if you apply early decision, they're going to see at least one marking period of your grades. So as a junior, you still have a little bit of control, and it does still matter. I'm sorry to tell you, be the bad guy in the room that says senior year still matters. It really does. And if you're applying regular decision somewhere, or if you're applying later in the year, they're going to see a few more marking periods and grades. So yes, it really still does matter what you're taking in your senior year. But the earlier in high school that you are, or even as you get to the later years of middle school, you really should start to look ahead. And I've heard this from a lot of parents. By the time you get to 7th or 8th grade, your math curriculum is almost set. The rest of high school math curriculum is almost set. And I like to tell people, be kind of curious, or do some exploration to see, can I take some summer classes? Can I work with my teacher to maybe work myself into the higher track in the subject where I'm not in the higher track right now? Ask the question. They might allow you to take a summer class. They might allow you to do some extra work to get yourself there. As a junior, you can't do that so much, but it's still worth asking the question. It's going to pay off down the road. In terms of academics, colleges are going a lot further past your performance. I mean, your performance is very important. The courses that you've chosen, how you perform in them, all very important. How you perform in comparison to the peers at your school, very important. But as they get more selective, as you really get to the more selective schools, they still can't take everyone that has performed very well. They still have a very small number of spaces relative to the number of students who have taken the most challenging coursework and have done really well throughout school. So they've got to look for something else that might become, and I think it really does become, immeasurable. They're looking for some other quality about you academically where you've really taken an interest in your schoolwork. And so here again, I would say to the juniors, you have a couple of months left this year to earn a nice teacher recommendation. So think about that. If you're a sophomore, or if you're younger, think about taking an interest in your schoolwork. I think a lot of us have gone to school with students who perform extremely well. They do everything they're supposed to do. They do it all right. They get the result. And they're not just a fly on the wall. They're an involved student. And yet, even knowing that student for whom everything is going right, we also know someone else in the classroom that was just a little bit more interested or a little bit more engaged. They went home and did a little extra reading on the topic. And the next day when we were discussing it in class, they were interjecting something brand new into the discussion that wasn't in the textbook, that the teacher didn't bring up. And everyone else was kind of uplifted, or they were kind of brought along to a higher level. That kind of thing is going to come out in a teacher recommendation. So think about that sort of stuff. Take an extra interest in your academic work. And I don't think you have to feign interest. If you don't have an interest in a particular area, don't go and fake it. But there probably is something where you do have academic interest, and you might be more willing to read a magazine article or a book or a web article about that topic, and you might explore it a little further. Go ahead and do that. Your generation has so much more at your fingertips than my generation ever did. I got out of college before the internet existed, so I went through college without email. I don't know if you guys can even imagine life without email. Cell phones didn't exist until well after I got out of college. So just imagine that. You have so much available at your fingertips. It has almost ratcheted up the expectation on your generation. And it has really kind of heightened how far you can take your academic curiosity. I say these words like academic curiosity and academic interest. It can sound like I'm telling you have to choose a major. And a lot of times adults will ask the students, are you interested in majoring in something? Because it might guide you in your college search. You don't need to choose a major for a lot of schools, so don't worry about choosing a major. I like to rephrase the whole thing and say to students, there may be a course that you've been interested in. You have a favorite teacher. You have a topic that you like to read about. Whether you've called it this or not, that's an academic interest. Explore that. Try to look at yourself a little bit more in that lens, and you'd be looking at yourself like a college admissions committee is going to look at yourself. Okay, that's a good, I think, overview. That's my overview of academics. I do want to touch on testing, which neither one of us wanted to talk about SATs or ACTs, but we figured it fell into, I thought it was more of an extracurricular activity, but Emily won this argument, and SATs and ACTs fall more into the academic side of things. Already tonight, I have now spoken about standardized testing more than I've heard any college admissions committee talk about standardized testing. And yet, I'm still going to talk about it a little bit. At some schools, it becomes a little bit more important than at other schools. I do find, though, that the media and the general public are placing much more emphasis on standardized testing than any admissions committee ever will. So please bear that in mind. I realize that taking a test on one given Saturday can be a stressful thing. And I wish I could take away that stress. And I don't know how yet to do that. It's an eternal quest for me to try to get students to be more relaxed. In fact, if a student's asking me how to prepare for testing, I still give the very basic advice of eat all your vegetables and get a good night's sleep. There are preparation techniques, there are practice tests that you can take, and that's fine. I like to see students ratchet their anxiety back a little bit there, take some of their emphasis that the student is placing on testing, and place more of that energy and focus into things like the college search and into their extracurricular activities and into their academic interests. That energy would be much better spent, better placed, if you were to spend it on some of those other things. Just a quick overview of testing. Many colleges are taking either the SAT or the ACT. I can answer for Penn, and Emily's had experience with other schools. I can answer for Penn that there's no difference, that they allow you to submit the SAT and 2 SAT subject tests. 2 SAT subject tests. Holding up the SAT, which is now 3 sections, and 2 SAT subject tests. Now, parents, these are nothing more than the achievements. All they did was rename the achievements to be the SAT 2 subject tests. So Penn requires 2 of those if you go the SAT route. On the other hand, if a student wants to take the ACT, and they do so with the writing section, apparently the writing section is optional. If you take the ACT, be sure to take the writing section, and that's it. That's a completed testing profile for Penn. Penn is not a believer in score choice, and that sometimes is a surprising factor to some people. Penn wants to take some of the anxiety and some of the gamesmanship out of testing, and we've seen a lot of students go out and take as much testing as they can to the point where it does become an extracurricular activity. It's one that doesn't bear that much value in the admissions process. But Penn is trying to take the gamesmanship out of things. And for years, Penn has always said, we'll look at your highest critical reading, your highest math, and your highest writing score, and then we'll look at your highest 2 subject tests on the SAT 2s. So they've always done the score choice for you, and now the College Board actually offers you an option whereby you can block certain scores for certain schools, but not for Penn. Penn still wants to see your entire testing history, and they will still pick and choose your highest testing scores. Imagine if you were to block one of your best scores. The way score choice works, and this is Penn's thinking on this, the way score choice works is you block an entire date of your SAT 1, which you scored 800 on the verbal, you've blocked that 800. Penn wants that 800 on the verbal to be in your record. So that's Penn's thinking there. They're not trying to trick you at all. They're trying to tell you, look, we want you to place emphasis on a lot of other things. So you have a couple of options out there. The tips. If you're a high school junior, you're probably knee-deep in this already. You do have to start planning ahead because you have to save some Saturday mornings. And I know how much you'd love to get up early on Saturday mornings. And thank the ACT and the SAT folks for getting you up early on a Saturday morning. You're going to have to save a couple of Saturday mornings so that you can take the test maybe a few times, but you're starting to get to that point. If you're a sophomore or younger, I will tell you it's never too early to think about taking some of the SAT 2 subject tests. Sometimes you've encountered the highest level of an academic subject in sophomore year at your school. Depending on how your school plays things out, you might take the highest level of European history in sophomore year at your school. Why not take the SAT 2 subject test in European history at the end of your sophomore year when it's fresh in your mind? Other schools, they might offer you Biology 2 or AP Bio in your sophomore year. It would make sense for you to take the SAT 2 subject test in bio at the end of your sophomore year in that case. So think ahead in terms of the testing. Your tests do count as long as you've taken them during your high school years. So that's the tip that I'll give. To students who are younger than sophomores, I don't want to build up the anxiety at all. I do remember, though, a person saying to me when I was in 9th grade that, hey, you can go and just take the SATs or the ACTs just to see how you do. Because you know you're going to take them again as a junior or a senior. You could go and take them just to see if you're comfortable with the tests. It's something to think about. If you don't mind giving up one Saturday to just gain that experience, you're not going to lose anything, at least the way Penn does things. We're always going to look at your highest scores. So just bear that in mind. I don't want to encourage people to go and test. There is such a thing as over-testing. Colleges don't care how many times you take the exam. I think there's a point of diminishing returns. And I think once you've taken the exam, the SAT or the ACT 2 or 3 times, your score is not going to change. In my opinion, your score is not going to change that dramatically when you take the test anyway. So those are some of my points on the SATs. I'm going to step aside and let Emily talk about extracurricular activities.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi. Now for something completely different. Just wanted to thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. When Steve and I were talking about topics, I said that I'd love to talk about extracurricular activities because that is my passion, is talking to students about their passions. So Steve talked about some big hurdles that you might have to take on in the academic part of your experience. Well, guess what? Once you've done all of that, you also have to have passions, interests, activities, clubs, other things that you do outside of the classroom. Admissions officers at selective colleges like to tell applicants that anywhere between 60 and 80% of applicants are academically qualified to be admitted. That means that all of those things that Steve talked about, they've done, they've tackled. They have the GPA that looks like it's within the range. They have SAT scores that look like they're within range. And yet we're talking about schools that admit 30%, 20%, 10% of applicants. So what are those other factors that admissions officers are looking for? For me, those other factors come in the extracurricular activities. So you'll hear people talk about leadership. You'll hear people talk about passion. Again, speaking to the juniors, there's not too much that you can change at this point in your extracurricular profile. What I would recommend is that you look very seriously at your choices for this summer. If you have the choice between spending the summer prepping for another SAT to get back to testing, or perhaps you have an opportunity to do something that takes one of your passions to a higher level, I would recommend doing that thing that takes your passion to a higher level. Very often parents ask about trips that are service trips. Do I have to take a service trip? It's junior year and I haven't done a service trip. That's probably what I should do. People are looking at me quizzically, like going to Costa Rica and painting a school. Service trips. Yes? Okay. So, no, you do not have to take your junior year summer and go do a service trip unless you have a history of an interest in service. And this particular trip is going to contribute to that message. If you're a musician and you spend most of your time playing the violin, I'd rather that your summer activities strengthen and support that passion. When you're thinking about an 8th grader looking ahead at high school, and you're talking about an 8th grader who maybe doesn't have an obvious passion, what can you do? Well, you can try stuff. Join different clubs. Try different activities. See what feels inspiring to you. And then try to stick with one or two of those things. You may also later try one or two new clubs or activities, but it's really important. Admissions officers like to see a continued, passionate expression. So in your extracurricular activities, they want to see that over the stretch of high school, you have really gotten deeply involved with at least one thing, preferably 2 or 3. And then maybe try one or two other things that kind of round out the picture. But they can say, this is a musician. This is a student who's really passionate about music. Or this is an athlete who maybe not a recruited athlete, because that's a separate conversation that you can also have. But if you're not a recruited athlete, but you love soccer, perhaps you're going to mentor young soccer players, or you're going to volunteer as a coach at a local community center. There are ways to express that passion. In the college admissions arena, admissions officers understand extracurricular activities in a series of levels. The first level is within the context of your high school. So what are you doing within the context of your high school? These are clubs, teams, activities that are offered right there where you take your classes. Beyond the high school, they're interested to see what you're doing in your local community. Are you taking one of those passions that you have outside of your school, maybe stretching it beyond the doors of your high school into the neighborhood where you live? Next, after your local community, is your region. Now, this can get a little bit more tricky unless you're involved with an activity that's competitive. If you're an athlete, it's obvious what regional involvement is. Even if you're a musician, it's obvious. If you're going to be an all-state, if you're going to sing and audition and be chosen for all-state, that is all of a sudden a bigger level of involvement. Beyond regional, believe it or not, there's national involvement. This could be you're the president of B'nai B'rith Youth Organization for the entire country. There is such a position. So there is national involvement, which students can engage to really show that beyond their school, beyond their community, and beyond their region, they are acting as a leader on a national level. There are actually international levels of involvement as well. They are rare, they are special, they're not for everybody. But just to give you an example, an organization called Seeds of Peace chooses students from conflict regions throughout the world, and they choose 15 American students to act as ambassadors. So if I see something like Seeds of Peace, I know it's rare and special. So I'm not suggesting that everyone has to have international involvement, but I do think it's important to understand that context, that admissions officers at highly selective schools are seeing that range of activity from president of the yearbook, editor-in-chief of the yearbook, all the way to international competition, international involvement. That's really the structure of what I wanted to say. I'm kind of ready for questions. Are you?
Yeah. In fact, I thought we could talk a little bit about essays.
Yes,
It flows. In fact, maybe I'll drill you with a question.
Sure.
How well does your extracurricular involvement, and we were going point counterpoint on this in a little bit, how well is your extracurricular involvement ready you to write college essays? Maybe I'll step off, or I'll just step aside. Because I know there are different ways of looking at this, and I'll allow you to address.
Sure. So the college essay is a wide open landscape. We were talking about the common application and Penn-specific questions, but really, the college essay is yours for the taking, and this is what seniors and juniors can really change at this moment. This is the live part of the application. And that's what admissions officers will tell you. When you visit campuses, they're going to say, the essay is the thing you can impact now. So that's why they really love essays. They really care about essays. And at highly selective colleges, they really read your essays. So they mean it. Extracurricular involvement that's meaningful and compelling can contribute to a meaningful and compelling essay. Now, that's not to say that your essay should become an overview of your extracurricular involvement. They have that in other parts of the application. What the essay is meant to do is to give you an opportunity to express some little detail about yourself that is going to help an admissions officer feel like they've met you, feel like they know you, feel like they can hear your voice, they know what you care about, they know what makes you tick a little bit more. And that's a tall order. So when you've had really compelling, meaningful extracurricular experiences, you have a deep well from which to draw for that compelling little grain of a topic that's going to convey something about you. So that goes back to the painting a school in Costa Rica question. Could something really meaningful come out of that, and could you have a fantastic essay? Absolutely. Could you also have that from having a job at a local store and meeting and interacting with different people every day, earning some money to put in your own pocket, or earning some money towards college, and talking about that in an essay? Absolutely. So really, the essay is, like I said, a wide open landscape. I'd like to give you an example. And this is actually, I was joking with Steve that Africa is the new Costa Rica, because a lot of students are going to Africa now, where 5 or 8 years ago, a lot of students were going to Costa Rica. So this is sort of built off of that. I was working with 2 students who had climbed Kilimanjaro. One had made it to the summit, and the other did not. They didn't know each other. But they both felt compelled to write essays about the experience of climbing Kilimanjaro. And obviously, who climbs Kilimanjaro, not a lot of people. So if you've done that, it's kind of an exciting thing to write about. But obviously, those were two very different stories. One story about summiting, and another story about deciding that it was really a better idea to turn back, and realizing that it was more about the journey for that writer than about the summit. So I just offer you that example as, to give you a taste of what an essay can do, regardless of what the exact experience was.
I love that you put a comment in there about that you might be able to write an essay about any experience that you had. I remember I delivered newspapers from the time I was about 10 until I was 17. That can make a legitimate college essay. The guy with the paper route. I don't even know if they have kids do that job. We don't want to discount anything, and we don't want to send everyone to the summit of Kilimanjaro.
Right.
Because we can't. And here was the counterpoint on the whole thing. I've read some terrific essays, and I've met some students who had these terrific ideas for stories they wanted to tell about their experiences. And the way I like to challenge them still, this is me being that Oprah Winfrey person, right? I would say to them, hey, what question are you answering? With the story about Kilimanjaro, you had a choice of 5 or 6 questions in the common application. Just curious, which one did you choose here? What are you writing about?
An event that changed your life.
And that should be the answer. She said, an event that changed my life, or an experience where I overcame something. However, in my experience with students, they usually can't tell me what question they're answering. And when you talk about a competitive application process, if the person reading your essay finds a very well-constructed essay with an interesting story, but they can't see what question you're answering, there might be someone else out there who has a well-constructed essay with an interesting story who actually answered the question. So that's what I like to tell students is go back to the basics and read the question first before you decide to write about Kilimanjaro or making ice cream cones or delivering newspapers. Find out what is your true self answer, what's your true genuine answer to that question first. And then, yes, then you want to write about this interesting experience and make sure that it actually fits that. So it's not really a counterpoint, and we had that discussion too.
I was about to counter your counter.
Go ahead.
What about a topic of your choice? But I hear what you're saying. I think it's more about knowing what your message is. I would say, what do you want the admissions officer to know about you when they leave the essay? What's that last feeling you want them to have?
Absolutely. There is a question in the common application, and it's option number 6, by the way, that says, write an essay on the topic of your choice. No student has retorted, well, I'm writing on the topic of my choice, and that has always bothered me. They haven't read the application, and some of them have written these essays early in the summer, right after their junior year, when the application might not be ready yet. So be careful of that. You might have an essay in mind right now that you think might make a great story. And you know what? You're probably not that far off. But wait until you see the question and make sure you're answering it. Because in the competitive world, you might have a beautiful essay, but if you didn't answer that question, be really careful about submitting that essay. And be extra careful about recycling an essay that you wrote for something else. Because these admissions folks, they're pretty savvy. They pick up on things. They pick up on tiny little nuances in your application. When they've read 1,000 applications a year, they can tell when you wrote that essay for something
I
else.
saw a lot of page 217.
Yeah.
That wasn't.
We should say what the question is.
But
Penn has an optional essay question this year. We don't know if they're going to have it next year. But it's been an optional essay question in the Penn supplement portion of the application that says, you've just completed your 300-page autobiography. Please send us page 217. Now, that's wide open. You can write about a lot of things. You can write about Kilimanjaro. You could write about something that's going to happen in the future, you hope. You can write about something that already has happened. So you have a lot of leeway here. But let's be careful. Let's make sure you match the theme. And even if you pick the topic of your choice, I'd like to see you be as autobiographical as the other questions are asking you to be, because those admissions people really want to get to know you as a person. And they want to know your genuine self. So be careful about that topic of your choice. Not that you want to avoid it, but just know why you're choosing it. Some people think they have the topic, that's going to stand out. And no one else is going to write about this. And sometimes they're writing about those trips to Costa Rica, and there are about 1,000 or 2,000 or more other applicants that are also writing about that experience. And you know what? I'm jealous. I think those trips are amazing, and I will admit that when I was 17, I was afraid to go that far from home. So more power to you for doing those things. But by all means, do them because you enjoy them. Do it because you really find it enriching and uplifting. I wanted to offer Emily a chance to comment on some of the things that I had said about the academics. I didn't know if you had anything to add.
I wanted to add an SAT tip.
Okay, please.
So you were talking about ways that you can think about the SAT earlier on, and I'm, as you said, I was like, it's the hot potato. I don't want to talk about it. But the one thing I will offer is that if you are 8th grader, 9th grader, and you're thinking, I wish there was something I could do to prepare for the SATs, there is. You can read the New York Times. You can underline words that you do not recognize, and you can learn them. You can also start doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. SAT words appear in the New York Times. It's a known fact. And I don't know who's copying who. But I highly recommend reading the New York Times, even if you just pick a section that you like at first, and then you start getting more and more into it. Even maybe parents, if you're reading the New York Times cover to cover, pull out a couple of articles that you think might be interesting for your son or daughter to read, and just sort of put them in a little pile. This will be really useful preparation, and it's really low pressure. So that's my SAT suggestion.
Yeah, reading is.
Oh, I have another one.
Go ahead.
A lot of people are asking about SAT versus ACT, and I'm actually even hearing parents say at this point, I've heard that schools are requiring both.
I've not heard of
This
any.
is disastrous.
Have you heard of any colleges requiring?
No.
Okay.
This is anathema to me. No. It's either or, and they are different tests. So if the inclination is to prepare for both and take both, I'm really concerned about the use of time or the misuse of time that would require. Students can take diagnostic tests for each. If you're prepping with a big company or you're prepping on your own or whatever, you can walk in and you can take a diagnostic test of each of these, see which one feels better, and prepare for one. This is more me imploring you than anything else, because I just think that it's unfortunate. I hear also the ACT is easier. That's not true. The ACT may be easier for a certain student. The writing section is very different on the two tests. On the SAT, it's really a template. You can learn and master a formula and plug in the question and really get good at the SAT writing section. On the ACT, the writing section is asking a student to really be analytical, to really think on her feet. That's not going to be natural for every student. So really think about what makes those two tests different, and really go in one direction or the other. And again, it's just a plea, but I really think it's going to make for a healthier students.
Before we get into questions, I was going to ask you a tough question.
Okay.
And I'd like you to think of one for me, and it'll launch our question period.
Okay.
Okay. I want you to answer this as if I'm not in the room. Please, try to do this.
Okay.
Because it's an alumni-related question. I work for an alumni office. I work for an alumni office at a school that has some kind of policy regarding legacies. In your experience, you've been doing guidance counseling for 10 years. How much does it really help to have to be a legacy when applying to a particular school? And act like I'm not in the room. You can say as negative as you want or as positive as you want. Go ahead.
Cool. For me, it's not a controversial question, really. This legacy status, and for everybody here, legacy status means that mom or dad went to X or Y college. Somebody in this room went to Penn, I assume, right? Okay. So legacy status is acknowledged in different ways at different schools. We were actually talking about this earlier. Penn really does a lot to acknowledge legacy status, and parents from any part of the university count as a legacy for an undergraduate applicant. Where I was in admissions at Columbia, that was not the case. A parent had to have gone to Columbia College for the student to be a legacy candidate. Okay, that's one piece. Legacy status across the board is acknowledged most favorably in early decision. Why? Because you are asking a college to care that you went there. They are asking you in return to make a commitment to them. and to say, my son or daughter has gotten to know my alma mater so well that this is where he or she wants to go to college, he or she knows it, there's passion, they know you, we're applying early, we are making a commitment. If you do that, at most schools, there is a little bit of an edge to that legacy status. It comes out as sort of an outlier, like being an athlete or being a very gifted musician. It's that little thing that's going to make the admissions officer look again. It doesn't mean that a candidate who's not qualified to gain admission will get in if they're legacy. But if everything else is equal, and one candidate is legacy and the other is not, and it's early decision, that legacy candidate has a bit of a leg up. Regular decision, at most schools, they will tell you all bets are off. So, that's been my observation.
Does it hurt you if you're a legacy and you go regular decision?
That is a very good question.
Can we repeat that so the rest
So
of
the question is...
I want to crack at that answer too. Go ahead.
Okay, so the question is, if you're legacy and your son or daughter applies regular decision, are you penalized? Very good question, and I would argue that in some cases the answer is yes. And the reason is, the reason is admissions officers are human. You have to keep that in mind. They want to be loved. And if they feel that you had an opportunity to express that love early decision and you didn't, it means you loved somebody else more. So, what I would suggest is if it's a situation where your son or daughter, or you, I know there are students in the room as well, didn't apply early anywhere, I would make sure they know that. I would make sure that comes from the high school counselor, or that even comes from the applicant. I didn't have first choice, I didn't apply early anywhere. Because otherwise the assumption is you applied early somewhere else that you love more than us, they said no, and now you're coming back to us where your mom or dad went to school and you want us to care about the legacy status.
Interesting. Now, that's fine, because you've worked with applicants to many institutions, so I want to know.
You can say if Penn has a gentler approach.
Well, no, actually, Penn would agree with a lot of what you said, and then we've got to get to the actual advice regarding should you apply an early decision, which has nothing to do with numbers. But I like to give stats that disprove part of what you said. There is a little extra consideration for the legacies who apply an early decision to Penn. There is no penalty for the students for the legacies who apply regular decision, and I have some stats that bear that out. But they seem to lose their advantage. It seriously drops off. Any advantage they may have had in early decision drops off in regular decision. And I'll give you the stats just so you can see how this all plays out. I'm a quantitative person. I apologize if you're not. But it helps to, and I don't think stats ever tell the whole, they never get the whole picture. There's a limit of statistics and the power of anecdote. But let me just give you the stats. In early decision, Penn has been admitting about 30% of the applicants, of the applicant pool, somewhere in the 30% range. And that can slide, 28 to 32% of the applicants during early decision have been admitted. If you just look at the legacies during early decision, their admit rate has been roughly 40%. And that also is a sliding number, somewhere between 38 and 42%. This year it was 41.5% of the legacies who applied early decision got admitted in early decision. Now, I'm fine with saying, yes, there's about a 10-point difference there, and there appears to be some advantage for the legacy who applies early decision. But to me, the guy in the alumni office, it's not a big enough one. And I'm allowed to be really biased here in favor of the alumni in the room and say, what about the other 58.5% in that equation? They were as committed as the other 41%. So I don't want to be a pessimist here. I do want to be realistic and point out they're still leaving behind too many for the alumni office. So I want to point that out. Now let's fast forward into the regular decision round, because here's a different set of statistics that sort of prove a different point. We tell you that you're not getting penalized as a legacy, but the advantage does slip away. The admit rate for Penn during regular decision has been somewhere between 13 and 15%. That's the ballpark range for the last several years. For legacies who apply regular decision, the admit rate has been the same, about 13 to 15%. So they don't have any disadvantage compared to their non-legacy counterparts. If you want to compare either of those groups, legacies or non-legacies, to the early decision pool, you'll see a significant difference. And I'm fine with being very upfront and transparent and showing people those numbers. But I need to reel it back and tell the students, all the students in the room, do earmuffs and act like you never heard those numbers because they're not meaningful to your college search. You need to go through the college search looking for a group of schools, and you will find a group of schools that please you in the academic sense, in the extracurricular sense, that really fit what you're all about, and you can get excited about going there for 4 years. And I believe in my heart that we could all find 30 or 50 colleges that meet that description. Do not apply to 30 colleges. It's too much work. You will water down the quality of the applications. But you're going to find somewhere around 10, I hope less than 10, colleges that you're going to apply to, and you should be happy with all of them. And if by means of very thorough research, one school has really risen to the top of that group, well, now you might be better equipped to decide whether you're an early decision applicant. You might also be better equipped to make a stronger application to that school and to the other 9. So I'd like to give a more complete answer to everything. But it's interesting to hear. This is exactly why we have someone join us who's not from Penn to get that more broad perspective. Now, did you have a tough question you wanted to ask me, or should we just go right to the audience? Maybe
no, you're batting mad. What would be tough, really?
We can just go to the audience, and we have some questions.
Yeah,
now, there was a fellow who asked me one as we came in, and I told him to ask him, so I feel like I should. He was asking about the AP class. Where are you?
Is there?
Oh, yeah, that's yours. Okay,
You
yeah.
sort of already addressed it.
Okay, go ahead. Why don't you repeat it so we'll make sure we spell it out?
You sort of addressed this in your starting comments, which is how do you guide your child, whether you should take the hardest classes and get B's, or a lower ranked class and get A's, and opt for positioning.
Okay, yeah. Well, maybe I did answer that. Do you want to take a crack at that? Is it better to take the AP class and potentially only get a B, or take the next less rigorous course where I know I could get an A? Do you want to answer that one? It's a tough one.
Sure. So we're at a selective college admissions conversation, so I can share with you the IB admissions officer's favorite answer to that question, which is it's better to get A's in the AP class.
Wait! I want to corner the admissions officer and say, I gave you option A and option B. So if you're the cornered admissions officer and you need to choose the AP course and get a B.
Okay. It really has to be contextualized, because if let's say it's a student who's taking 4 or 5 APs and they're really comfortable in 4 out of those 5 classes, and they're really feeling like they're going to get A's, and there's just that one other AP, they're really curious about it, but they feel like they might get a B, I would rather that they take that tough class too. If it's a question, the more rigorous course. But see, there's so much gray, because if it's a student who really is going to struggle for the B and is looking at mostly B's, and it's just untenable, well, then you don't want to put that student into AP classes. But you need to understand what that does for the college process. We really are talking about a very small segment of schools. Once you get past that segment, colleges are still, so let's say in the selective colleges rather than highly selective colleges, they would argue probably that they'd rather see rigor than the A. So intellectual curiosity has weight, and not shying away from the challenge has weight. This is a question. Do you want to answer for Penn, or do you?
Yeah, sure.
Want a broader
Maybe
answer?
we'll switch on and off.
That's a good question.
Does the college
GPA.
admissions office recalculate your GPA? And was there a second part of that
That assumes
question?
weighted GPA.
Oh, okay. Based on honors versus, does the college recalculate the GPA if you've taken tougher courses, or do they weight it somehow? Actually, the colleges don't go through that exercise. Your school may do it. Your school might provide a weighted GPA and an unweighted GPA. The college is just looking at actually one or the other of those, but they're really getting a context of, or they're getting an idea of how much could you challenge, how much could a student challenge themselves at that school, how much did you challenge yourself at that school, and how did you perform, which is in effect looking towards what a weighted GPA would be. However, They can't look so much at a weighted GPA because different schools use different weighting systems. And so they've got to really look at it the way they want to. The college, basically, they'll place emphasis on things that they think are important. Your college or your high school may feel differently. Your high school might not give any weighting, and you could have a person who's #1 in the class who has not taken any of the challenging classes. Well, then that #1 rank would not be worth so much. Now, I realize I'm talking to people where the rank is not really an issue.
I think that's a really good point, though. That goes back to your question, which is a straight A average in a curriculum that's not rigorous is not going to be interesting to a highly selective college.
What happens if your high school doesn't offer AP? And also, how do you factor in the non-core classes?
Okay, we have a follow-up question.
Good question over there.
But you can restate them again for me. It's what happens if
Your
you're...
high school might not offer AP.
Yeah, your school doesn't offer AP courses. A lot of the Friends schools don't offer AP courses. I love to use them as an example anyhow. Well, yeah, they might, yeah. Some of the Friends schools, the Quaker schools, are opposed to AP courses. And I love to use them as an example because Penn's mascot is the Quaker. And we're not out to get, we're not against the Quaker schools. There's not really any connection or relationship there. But they're looking at you in the context of that school. So if you attend a school that does not offer AP courses, you're not to be expected to take them because they're looking at what your school offers. And then the follow-up to the follow-up, and then we have to get somebody else to ask the question, is what does the school do with the non-core courses? How do they look at those? They do take a look at those. I think they put a lot more emphasis on math, science, English, history, and foreign language courses. And there are a few other things that could fall into those, under those headings or just adjacent to those headings that would be academic. They're placing most of the emphasis, and I mean the lion's share of the emphasis is placed on those core courses.
With that said,
Yes?
if there are courses that support the extracurricular
Yeah.
passion,
That's...
those become very interesting choices.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you're taking a journalism class, and in addition to your English courses, and you're interested in writing in journalism or English or something like that, yeah, then they help to color what the student is all about. You've had your hand up.
I actually have two questions. One is...
We're going to start limiting this.
do you have any kind of quote-unquote quota system? We're talking about kids right now from New York City, many very competitive schools. Do you place limits on numbers of kids from a particular school?
Terrific question. Terrific question about quotas by high school or by region. And just to get to your second question.
My second question had to do with a comment Emily made about leadership versus involvement.
Okay.
I was curious just about when you talk about different levels of participation. So, for example, I have a son who's interested in many things and participates. It might be regionally in one thing and locally in something else, but not necessarily as a leader. Is that synonymous or they're different?
Interesting. Why don't
That
I
is
take,
interesting. You
I'll
want to
take,
do the...
I'll take the quota question,
yeah.
and you can take the
Yeah,
leadership
you got
question.
it.
We're trying to divide and conquer here a little bit. The question was, and this is a very popular one, and believe it or not, people outside of the New York City region, they ask this question too. So we get this question from Kansas and Arizona and Idaho and a whole bunch of other places. Does Penn place a limit, or do any selective schools place a limit on how many students they would take from a given region or from a given high school? And the answer, very simply and very truthfully, is no. The admissions people love to remind me and you that they have one single quota, and that is to end up with 2,400 exciting freshmen. That's the size of the freshman class at Penn. They could take everyone from a given high school. It's not very likely, I admit, they admit it too. They could take no one from a given high school. Now, I'll ask the challenging follow-up question that I've heard. I've had an alumnus who said, look, I have had 3 or 4 kids go through the same high school, and I see year after year, Penn's been taking somewhere between 3 and 5 students out of the school. How could you tell me that there's no quota there? It seems, from behavior that they're aiming for 3 or 5 students from that particular high school. I point to consumer behavior here. You could also look at the applicant pool year after year, and you get a similar number of applicants based on state, based on high schools, based on regions. So some of that stuff is repeating because that's how the consumers come to the colleges. No matter what school you're talking about, whatever university or college you're talking about, it is challenging for them to go and get applicants from high schools where they haven't gotten applicants in the last couple of years. That is true for Penn, it's true for Harvard, it's true for all the schools that have household names. They cannot simply pick up new applicants from other schools. So it does make the kind of general market behave very similarly from one year to the next. But no, there is not a quota, there's not a limit. They can do what they want. They're doing what they're compelled to do, and that is going for the exciting applicants. I'll let you take the leadership versus involvement question.
It's an interesting question. Leadership and involvement are different. That doesn't mean that deep involvement is not valuable, but a student who has led something and can show that that was part of their experience certainly has something different to bring to the campus community than a student who has simply participated. So it's not to devalue the participation, but if your son is matched up against the student who does that same activity and is the president or the editor-in-chief or the founder, that other student is going to look a little sparklier and shinier.
Even if there's breadth instead of depth. So
Well, depth has more value than breadth.
Could you say what that means, breadth versus
Sure.
depth? I know where you are. I want to make sure everyone in the room is on the
The
same.
follow-up question was, if there's a breadth of involvement without depth, how is that valued? I would argue that that's the most challenging extracurricular profile. One that has a lot of activities, but none that it looks like the student really got to sink his teeth into. Admissions officers are human, and they're trying to figure out who are you going to be on our campus. And if that's hard for them to figure out because it looks like you dabbled in a lot of stuff, but you never really fell in love with one or two things, it's really hard for them to figure out where you'll fit in. And they get a little less excited when they feel that way. You're looking also in the extracurricular life for threads, things that connect the activities. So if there's a breadth of activity and several of them kind of go together nicely, a student who loves to swim, who's also a lifeguard and also is a licensed, certified scuba diver or something like this, where it's one-off involvement, but they all kind of connect. That can work. But leadership really does have its own kind of thing, its own cachet.
Is there a student that had a question? I wanted to make sure a student had a chance to ask a question. Go ahead. Are you a student? You're the 9th grader. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you can offer any more advice to people that go to smaller schools who generally don't, even the top students don't generally apply or get into the very selective colleges.
So let me just try to get the lay of the land in your school. Some of the top students, they're not even aiming for the most selective schools?
Yeah, well, it's a religious school, so most of the kids end up going to Yeshiva University.
Why isn't that one of the top schools? It's a terrific school.
It's a cultural.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Penn.
Does the advice actually doesn't change? Yeah, and I'm going to try to restate the question. Correct me if I'm wrong. You may attend a small school that's very cultural or religious in nature, and you're finding, in your experience, that the students from there are looking towards maybe some of the cultural colleges. Or is that the trend? Am I capturing it right? Tell me if I'm not.
No, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if there's any different advice that you can give to
Is there different advice? Because when you get to be a senior, you may be the first person from your school that's going to apply to Columbia or to Penn in several years. And does that change our advice? Does it change the advice of the student?
Broadly speaking, it does not. Specifically, you're in a unique situation that I'm quite familiar with because I saw a lot of applicants from those types of environments when I was at Columbia. I'm not sure if it's helpful to everybody or if you want me to just take it offline.
Well, maybe you should take that one offline.
Yeah.
Sounds very specific.
I can.
The short answer to your question is actually no. It doesn't change the advice. Some people would believe. Well, that's my short answer. Some people would believe that if you're the only applicant from your school to, say, Columbia, that Columbia only has one applicant to choose from, and that would improve your odds. Actually, that's not true. You have to be that exciting applicant that can show their fit. That you've had this impact academically in extracurriculars, and you're going to continue to make that kind of impact at Columbia or Penn. But why don't we'll address that.
Yeah, but there is actually a broader answer that I can just offer, and I can speak to you more specifically. But if you find yourself in a context where everybody is doing the same thing and following the same patterns, try to break out of that in your own way. Don't do something that makes you uncomfortable. But if you see that everybody at your school is doing the same thing, going to the same program, doing the same community service activity, and you want to really set yourself apart, I highly recommend breaking out of that mold and creating your own space.
It's really tough to do when you're 13 to 35. There's a question, yes, the red tie.
Where you have, say, 10 to 50 students from one school applying to 10 of the other good schools, which is typical, how much do you have to be concerned that the college guidance counselor or head of school will have influence pushing one or more students ahead of others?
Oh, yeah, 0. I'll repeat the question. I already gave my answer. I'm from a school where there are 10 or even 50 of us applying to the same college, and I'm worried that my guidance counselor is going to champion this guy's case over here and not mine. That's kind of it. The guidance counselor has a little bit of pull here. I've never seen it in my 7 years at Penn or my few years at other places. I've never seen the guidance counselor have that kind of pull. Remember, there are a lot of pieces of the application. The guidance counselor report is one of them. And the purpose that I've seen for the guidance counselor report in the application is they only have 2 teacher recommendations, and maybe a school might require 3 teacher recommendations. But the guidance counselor kind of has a view of your entire record. They could say what other teachers might say about you as well. So you can all choose 2 teachers that are going to write glowing things about you. Remember, the others get some representation indirectly. Yeah, absolutely. But let me finish the point here. Don't worry so much about what your guidance counselor is going to do. There's so much else in the application that you have control over. And the admissions people know that. So be careful about placing the blame or misdirecting some of your efforts in the application process. You want to?
I just want, if I could just take a counterpoint.
Yeah, sure.
There is a special thing that happens in New York City private schools that is what made you ask that question. And I think that the answer can be yes. Guidance counselors can, in some environments, play something of a gatekeeper role. The best advice that I can offer is, if you're facing that, stand up for yourself and really try to do whatever you can to have that candidacy supported. Because really, unfortunately, they really do. Sorry.
I just haven't seen this in the environment.
I mean, it's probably more, probably I'm seeing it.
I haven't seen it in the environment. And in fact,
that's great.
And just to counter, then we have to go to another question. I've seen students fear, or really it's the parents that fear that this is happening, that someone's out to get my kid or keep my kid out of certain schools. And the measures that they take to counter what they think are happening are backfiring on them. That the parent or the student is calling too often, or they're defending something in their application that actually they're only pointing out another flaw, or they're pointing out a flaw that was there, and now they're highlighting it. And they're making the admissions officer see, oh, you have this flaw. Boy, first time around, I didn't see it. So be careful about that. Be careful about how much you're trying to counter things. I always tell people, focus on what's required in the application, focus on what you can control in the application, and if you're trying to direct your efforts elsewhere, that could really backfire on you. And you have your question.
How does all this advice apply to, and what are the rates and chances of acceptance for students from small, specialized public schools?
Yeah, the advice still applies. Yeah, when you talk about a small, specialized private school versus a small, specialized public school, it's just going to change the context in which the admissions officer is looking at you. So it doesn't matter if you go to the large public school, the small public school, the high-powered private school. I've heard the way some of them are described. Best high school in the nation. They're still looking at how did you maximize your opportunities at that school and within that community. So it really doesn't change the advice. You've got to be that interesting, engaged student who's excited about learning, who the teachers love to teach, that they're going to rave about in their letters of recommendation. That person who took leadership, or I like to say passion in activities. I went to school with people who were president of a club that really didn't do anything for the club. And I knew that the other person in the club that really didn't have a title did a lot for that club, and that came out in the teacher recommendations. So, at any rate, it's going to change the context. It doesn't mean you have to work any less. So sorry. You want to ask a question?
Sure.
Is there any concern if the student's passion isn't exactly lined up with where their academic interests are?
No, not at all. Why?
Are you talking about the extracurricular passion?
Extracurricular passion might be in the arts, but their academic passion is in science.
No,
Yes,
those are not conflicting.
That is completely fine. That's fine. In fact, I'd love to tell a story about Penn. There was two guys who went to Penn. They were science majors. They met in the music classroom and formed a little rock band. Now, the adults in the room might have heard the Hooters. Two of those guys went to Penn in the 70s. The students in the room don't know. Hooter Mania, you know, back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Two of those guys, Eric was the physics major at Penn. Rob Hyman was the bio major. No. We have a dean of admissions named Eric. This was a different guy. No, but so no, it doesn't have to line up.
And also,
we finally agree on something.
I totally agree. I'd also like to add one more thing about extracurriculars. If you don't find your extracurricular interest being pursued in your high school, that doesn't mean it's not valid. And it doesn't mean that you may not be able to find it outside of your high school or start something that cares about it at your high school. So don't feel limited by the confines of your high school environment. Yes? Sorry.
I've got a very prosaic question. How important is what you do in Nightingale compared to what you do later? That's my first question. Picking up on the gentleman in the back who asked about guidance counselors, I just want you to know that many of the New York private schools are telling every kid, this is your target, this is your safe, and we like you to stick within the ranges. So it's almost like a lot of the choices are out before you start, because the counselor has already told you this is your target, or this is your reach, and this is your safe.
Yeah.
We need to go outside of that. The feeling is that they do try to influence.
The first question was, how important is 9th grade as opposed to 10th grade or 11th grade performance? And the second question was about guidance counselors.
Picking up on what the gentleman said about guidance counselors, they're now coming and telling the kids, I don't know if anybody else can pick up on this is your target, and this is your safe.
Well, let's do one question at a time here. Do you want to take the 9th, 10th, 11th grade?
So 9th grade matters. The vast majority of highly selective colleges look at 9th grade just the same way that they look at 10th and 11th. That doesn't mean that they're not open to seeing growth. They are, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't come on strong in 9th grade. There are some colleges among the selective pool that tell you out loud they don't look at 9th grade. So Princeton actually, they're not really emphasizing 9th grade. And I have found that most of the counselors here in New York know exactly which those schools are. So that might be a very good thing to turn to the school council for.
Our dean of admissions actually agrees with this spot on, well, in terms of the 9th grade, 10th grade, that they do look at your entire high school transcript. They do not disregard any of your high school transcript, but that they do look at trends. And an upward trend is obviously more attractive than the other way around. But you do have students who don't need an upward trend, that they've been up all along. So remember, that's part of the context as well. The other question was about guidance counselors. There are guidance counselors that will kind of tell you right up front, look, this school could be a reach for you, and this school is more realistic for you. And so they're setting kind of a range. And the feeling is that maybe that guidance counselor has already started to influence the students' choices. My response to that is that's their job. And you don't have to stay within that range, but they're supposed to give you advice. And if you don't want to take it, that's okay. And you know what? They can be wrong. But they're supposed to give you something, some kind of advice that shows you, look, this is where it's realistic for you, and this is where you should aim for. What they're probably not covering in that is the detail why that school should be interesting to you. They're probably looking at the academic profile of your school, or looking at your academic profile and how it might fit in with that school's averages. That is a useful step to go through, and that's the job of a guidance counselor, to give you some kind of picture like that. Yes, sir.
If your kid's passion is something like athletics, music, that take a lot of time, a lot of rigor, practice, and travel, how does that impact the decision to take the advanced courses versus the regular courses in terms of their ability to put in the time in both the academics and the
Interesting. Yeah, I'm going to repeat that so everyone can hear it. Your student has a passion in certain activities that are very time-consuming. Sometimes sports seem more time-consuming. Sometimes music seems more time-consuming. How does that impact what they should be doing academically? It does not. And in fact, I'd like to say, schools are not placing more or less emphasis on any given types of activities. They want to know what makes that student tick, no matter what it was. So they're not placing more value on athletics or music or community service. They're interested in what do you genuinely love to do and what makes you tick. That does not take away from the need for you to have academic excellence, for you to have the academic rigors and the performance in the classroom. So be careful about that. Now, I've had students retort to me that, boy, it's really tough for me to balance these things. That's part of growing up, that we have to learn that time management. We have to learn how to give up certain things that are a little bit less important. I've met a lot of students who have said that, but they could also tell me what happened on Dancing with the Stars over the last couple of weeks. There are certain things in life that we can pass on to emphasize what is important. The other thing is, we can tell you what to do, and it could sound like you're doing everything right, and in the end, a really selective college could say no anyhow. So you do have to decide what's important for you. And I'm going to leave this to the parents, not to the students. The parents have to decide what's important. If my student does take all the AP courses, but they're miserable, at the end of the day, you don't want to live with a student that's like that. And they might not be too motivated to go on to college. So you've got to figure out the happy medium there, the balance there, where this person's going to be able to, at the end of their high school career, feel good about what they've become and feel motivated to take that next step. If that means that they've made a few choices that a selective college won't like, don't worry. There are about 2,500 other colleges out there that might be banging down their door to get them to go there, where they could be a star. So bear that in mind.
I would also add, you probably have heard the old adage, if you want something done well, ask a busy person. I find that when students face the opportunity or the possibility of dropping their favorite thing so that they can do better on the test, they actually don't always do better because they're miserable. Basketball practice is a huge part of the day of their life. It's an outlet. Band practice, whatever the case may be, it's like part of how they understand themselves, and if you take that away, it creates a hole. So I think it's an interesting question that you ask. I totally agree with what you're saying. But I would make the argument for really trying to make both things happen.
Okay, my daughter actually grew up abroad. English is a second language. Did disastrously in 9th grade. Came to America, did fabulous 10th grade, so far 11th grade. Does she even have a chance? She really did bad.
So she had a student who had a really weak 9th grade, but did really well.
In another country, English is a second language, and did fabulous.
In 10th and 11th grade, that's not really well. Yeah. Do you want to take the budget?
Sure, why not?
Does she have a
see
chance?
A huge problem. Yeah, I guess it depends on a lot of other factors, but she may have a story to tell. I think an admissions officer is going to want to know what that journey was for her. But if she's found her place now and she's doing exceptionally well and she's really curious and all pistons are firing, I think she should be all right.
I think anyone has a chance.
Yeah.
What I fear is when somebody says they have a good chance. When you're talking about selective schools, places that admit 30% or less, those odds are not odds that I like in Las Vegas. So I don't like anyone saying they have a good chance. No one has a good chance. She does have a chance. And I don't know, if we're talking about the 9th grade could that keep her out of phonics? Yeah, it is something that they'll see, but has she really turned the corner since then is the next question. And then they'll look at her in the context. I mean, context is a word that can be applied to almost every question we've been asked. They'll look at the context here and ask, how much did she challenge herself within what her school offers? That's a big question. Well, that's another question. How much did she challenge herself within that school? Did the 9th grade grades keep her from moving into the top tracks in 10th grade, and then also in 11th grade and also in 12th grade? If we're talking, I'm getting too much into creating a scenario here.
It's technical.
Yeah, it becomes very technical. Yeah. But let's say a person really turned the corner, and now they've taken all the most rigorous courses, and they've really done well. Does that person stand a chance? Absolutely, but it's a contextual review for every student. How are we doing on? Oh, this is, I've been told that we have a student that's going to ask the last question. Yes. In the summer, is it more important, I'll let you ask the next question. In the summer, is it more important to pursue academic interests or extracurricular interests?
Or a
non-academic.
Or a job.
Or a job. What's more important?
Well, I can share my own personal biases, but I think really we're talking about context again. If in the context of your life and your profile, this academic interest is just the thing that gets you really fired up and you want to pursue it over the summer, then I say absolutely you should do it. If the extracurricular interest is your true love, but you think it will look good to take the class, then you have your answer. Because you shouldn't really want to do anything because it looks good. So pursue your passion.
I agree with this one. Go after what you really want to do, that you're going to enjoy doing. That's what's going to enrich you. And frankly, that's what's going to enrich you no matter what the college says. That's what you really want to shoot for. And it may be something that becomes a more genuine thing that you discuss later on in your application. Or if not, it's still genuine and you still got something out of it.